everybody, my name's Brent. Welcome back to my workshop, Build Thread. I'm just about ready to start making some sawdust on the big timbers, but I have a couple of little items of homework that I have to do before I really get into that. It's a bit painful because I'm really excited to start making some sawdust on the big heavy timbers, but I know there are a few things that doing ahead of time will speed everything up. One of the big things is templates. I use templates a lot in timber framing, more so than some folks. I find it really speeds everything up and also helps with consistency. But before I make all the templates, I have to make the final decision on some of the joinery. Now most of that is done, but the one remaining question I have is around the template that I'm going to use for laying out all the brace pockets. If you think about it, the braces are the most numerous timber in most every build, plus they have two ends. So having a template that you can use to speed up your brace pocket layout is really, really helpful. Now, all of my brace blanks are from kind of 2 or 3 different sources. I cut them and milled them all myself, but some of them were a couple of years apart. And I'm not exactly sure how thick they're going to finish because I joint and plane them, I make them all 4 square. And in doing so, everything of course is a little bit thicker than they are right now. And I'm not exactly sure how thin they're going to turn out. So what I'm going to do today is pick through the pile and find the thinnest ones. I'm going to joint and plane them, make them 4 square, and then I'm going to actually cut the joinery in some of them. Then I will know exactly how thin the braces are going to be. I'll plane them all down to be the same number, and then I can make a template that I know is going to work throughout the entire frame. So thought today will be probably the first of maybe 2 or 3 videos on braces, and this will primarily be about the process of milling them and machining them up to make them 4 square. And then a subsequent video will talk a bit more about the theory and about how I cut the joinery on the ends. Hope you find it helpful.
So the layout system that I use, and I've been talking about a lot in this shop build thread, can be used to produce braces. So if you don't have this machinery, you can use line rule to produce your braces, no problem at all. But making them 4 square lets me easily use the miter saw and some other shop tools to get through the big, fairly boring job of making a lot of braces for a frame. Braces may be the least interesting member of a frame, but it's very important that they're made accurately, as being only a 1/16 of an inch off can really set your frame out of square. So these braces have been handled properly since milling, but they've probably picked up some grit, so I'm going to make sure that they're good and clean by giving them a good scrub with a brush before running them through the machines. Now this 75-year-old walk-in joiner is just a real pleasure to use, and with the patented skew knife head in it, leaves a beautiful finish on most everything I've ever run through it. Now if you're unfamiliar with what a jointer does, it does a lot of different things for you in a wood shop, but the main way it's used is for making material flat and making 2 edges perfectly 90 degrees to each other, and that's how I'm using it here. Now once all the brace blanks have been processed on the jointer, I'm using the big shaper to bring them down to an even constant width, with the remaining edge parallel to the one that I made on the jointer and perfectly 90 degrees to that nominal 8-inch face that I also made flat on the jointer. Now when I'm set up in the new shop, this step will be done much more efficiently on my big thickness planer running the stock on edge. But till then this works just fine. Now if you're unfamiliar with a shaper, I have a lot of shaper content on this channel, but in simple terms you can think of it as a giant and much more capable router table. So here I'm running a 5-inch tall by 4-inch diameter spiral block by Whitehill Tools. It's the same company that makes the peg making tooling that I showed in an earlier video. It's probably my favorite shop tool and surely the most versatile machine, and it's going to be vital in many aspects of my shop build. So here I'm using what's called a back or an outboard fence to machine the blanks down to a common width. It's too much to get into in any detail in this video, but essentially the component on the left is determining the space between it and the apex of the cutting circle. So when you feed the stock through, the cutter machines away anything that's in excess of that. This can be quite a dangerous operation if not done properly, so make sure you've got some training before you ever try this. Once brought down to final width, it's time to plane them down to their common thickness, which ended up being 3 11/16, which is just fine. So now we have a 4-square blank, as it's referred to, that is straightforward to use on any of the woodworking machines for the next steps. I took the time to make a custom support for the miter saw that matches the height of the bed of the miter saw exactly. I'm screwing it and the miter saw to the workbench after making sure that everything is level and coplanar. This means that nothing shifts on me while I'm moving some heavy brace stock around on it. So I actually own 2 big radial arm saws, but one of them is quite a basket case and is in a million pieces waiting to be restored, and the other is 1,000 miles away on our new property. So even though they are the superior tool for the job, I'm still going to be using the miter saw for this one, and it'll do the job just fine. So I've made this template to speed up the brace layout process, but I've decided to talk about all the templates together in the next video and cover some of the brace geometry at the same time. But I clamp the template to the stock to make sure that the tracing is accurate, and then I'm checking with a reliable square and filling in a couple of lines that I couldn't do with the template. All under the supervision, of course, of Leon the shop cat, who's making sure I'm doing everything properly. So I chose to banish Leon from the shop before turning on the dust collector and making the first cuts. It's wise not to assume that your saw is cutting properly on all planes, and it's good to verify. So instead of measuring and marking, I use a marking gauge to mark the tenon side of these offset brace tenons. Now I use the track saw to cut right on the line for the shoulders, and then the 10¼ worm drive to cut the cheek and reveal the tenon, making sure to leave roughly a 1/16 of an inch to fine tune on the bench. The skinny little saw blades that go in these saws often wander, and since you can't put it back on, it's a good idea to stay away from the line a little bit. Now this is one of the best things I've ever done for speeding up the brace production process, and I'm quite excited to share this idea with you. Now, compared to a large structural timber weighing hundreds of pounds or even more, braces are quite light. So when you're using hand tools to finalize the joint, the brace wants to move around on the sawhorses or the workbench, and it kind of drives me crazy. So you can clamp it, but you need to have 2 clamps, one on each end, and it's really time consuming. So I've had this idea for a set of stops on the workbench for a long time, and I took the time this winter to try it out, and it worked perfectly. Now these stops are just made from scraps, and they're positioned and angled on the workbench so that when you're pushing on the cheek with whatever tool that you're using to pare it down with, you're not going to be able to shove it across the workbench. It positions the tenon close enough to the edge, it lets you just move it out of the way a little bit so you can use your tenon checker to check the thickness. And to do the other side, all you have to do is lift it up, put it over top of the stops, and set it back down again, and there's no need to clamp or unclamp. Now I always chamfer everything right away and cut the fresh end cuts in wax right away too. Then it's time to rough cut the arches on the bandsaw. So I trace the shape using the same template I'm going to use later on with the shaper, and then with the help of my trusty assistant, I rough it out on the bandsaw. At this stage you can certainly sand it smooth, as I've done many times, but I'm going to speed it up by template machining it with the same cutter head I used earlier on the big shaper. So this overall approach for me has been a real game changer. Using Whitehill's spiral block this way is faster, it's a lot less dusty, it also gives it cleaner and more accurate results than through sanding. Now, using a shaper this way is a great thing to master, but it's a bit of an advanced technique, so please don't use this as an instructional video. I just want to show you how I'm going about it. In general though, building a good quality and easy to use jig for safely holding the blank speeds everything up and makes it a lot safer. So you see here I've got 3 toggle clamps, plus I'm adding a couple of number 8 screws up through the bottom of the template into the non-visible portion of the brace, so that it's no chance of it moving on me. I've added a homemade guard that covers all of the cutter that's not being used for machining the edge. It also includes a 5-inch dust collection port on the back. So as you can see, the results are amazing. Other than maybe easing the edges a little bit, I'm not going to sand these at all. Here you can see a before shot with all the bandsaw marks, as well as an after shot after I've machined all the edges with the block. Now it's just time for a nice coat of oil. So in the next video, I'll go into more details about the brace geometry and how I calculate all the dimensions that I use, but also talk a fair amount about making and using the template for the braces, but also all the other templates that I'll use during the layout process. This is a logical segue into the final video on layout, where I walk through the process of laying out and cutting a post from scratch, right to finish. So if you found this interesting and helpful, please hit the thumbs up button. It doesn't cost you a dime, but helps me and YouTube know that you appreciate the content. Thanks very much for watching.